Chapter 5 Wednesday, May 29th, 1776. The inhabitants of New York are in general brisk and lively. It rather hurts the European eye to see so many slaves upon the streets. There are computed between 26 and 30,000 inhabitants. The slaves make at least a fifth part of the number. Letter written by Patrick M. Robert, a Scotsman visiting New York. The Hartshorn docked in New York the next morning, just after a sailor brought down some old biscuits for our breakfast. I picked out the worms and tossed them through the porthole, then gave the biscuits to Ruth. Madame Lockton's voice rose above the shouting sailors. "Bring those girls up," she said. A fellow missing most of his teeth stuck his head down the hatchway and waved us over to the ladder. We climbed up, shading our eyes against the bright light of day. Men of all types and colors swarmed the deck, carrying casks and chests down the gangplank, scurrying up the rigging to tend to the sails, unloading gear, loading gear, and making me feel very small and in the way. Ruth stood at my side and stared so hard her thumb fell out of her mouth. The ship was tied up at a long dock, one of many that jutted into the river. The sun sparkled off the water so strong I had to shade my eyes. Tall houses of brick and stone faced us, with rows upon rows of windows looking down at the street. They reached higher than the oldest trees back home. There were smaller buildings, too, all crowded shoulder to shoulder with no room for a feather to pass betwixt them. We had arrived soon after a heavy rain. Soldiers splashed through the glittering puddles, toting wood, emptying wagons, carrying buckets hither and fro, and standing about on corners conversating with each other. Some wore uniforms and carried long muskets. Others, in homespun clothes, dragged fence posts to a barricade. There were ordinary people, too, maids with baskets over their arms moving into and out of shops, and cartmen pushing their barrows over the cobblestones, calling out to each other and yelling at the dogs in their way. The working people were dressed muchly as we did in the country, but there were a few gentry who stuck out of the crowd like peacocks wandering in a chick pen. Some of the working folks were black. In truth, I had never seen so many of us in one place, not even at burials. A wagon drawn by two thick-necked horses stopped just beyond the end of the dock. Not far behind it came a beautiful carriage drawn by two pale gold stallions and driven by a stout man in livery with a three-cornered hat on his head. He clucked to the horses to walk on until he stopped behind the first wagon. The toothless sailor approached just again and pointed down to the dock where the crates and casks stamped Lockton and Foot were being stacked. "That's where they belong. Don't wander off or one of them soldiers will shoot you dead." He laughed as he walked down the swaying plank. We followed with tiny steps, Ruth's hand in mine. As I stepped onto the solid dock, I stumbled. "There you are!" exclaimed Madame Lockton, coming around the stacks of crate. "Be careful with that," she said to two deckhands carrying a fine walnut chest. "That goes on the back of the carriage, not to the warehouse." The men nodded and carried the chest towards the beautiful carriage with the golden horses at the end of the dock. "Pretty horses," Ruth said. A soldier at the end of the dock picked up his musket and stopped the two men carrying the walnut chest. There was a brief argument. Then the sailors returned, still carrying their burden. "What's this?" Madame asked as they set the chest at her feet. "I told you to put that in the carriage." "Begging your pardon, madam," the sailor said, "but them fellows say all cargo has to be inspected at the wharf before it enters the city. Order of some committee what's in charge here." "Inspected!" She lifted her chins. "Those are my personal belongings. They will not be inspected by anyone. I do not permit it." Master Lockton had been half following the turn of events while supervising the unloading. As his wife's voice rose, he hurried to join her. "Now, dear," he said, "I told you there would be some inconveniences. We must be accommodating. Look, there's Charles. He'll straighten this out." A second wagon had pulled up next to the first. A round, short man rolled off it and bustled up to the Locktons. "What are you doing here?" demanded the round man. "You shouldn't have come back." "Lower your voice, Charles," Lockton said. "Where are the men I instructed you to bring?" The round man pulled a handkerchief out of his waistcoat pocket and wiped his face. "Washington's men took them all to work in that blasted fortifications. Oh, double blast! Look, there's Bellingham." An official-looking man in a somber black coat had stepped out of a building across the street and was striding towards our little group, walking stick in hand. He was followed by a thin fellow carrying a book near as big as Ruth. Behind him walked a slave boy, about my height, whose arms were weighted down with wooden contraption and a small case with a rope handle. The boy wore a floppy red hat, his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow, the blue breeches of a sailor, and a pair of dusty boots. "Bellingham is eager to arrest you," Charles told Master Lockton. "I told you it was still unsafe. You should have waited." "Anne," Lockton fixed his eyes intently on his wife. "Do not fail me." She gave a nod. "You have a plan?" Charles asked. "Everything is in order," Lockton said. "Elihu Lockton," Bellingham called, waving his walking stick. "Come, friend, join us." 3 more soldiers appeared and lined up a few paces behind him. "Smile, everyone," Lockton commanded through clenched teeth. "Pretend to be happy rebels." The Locktons and Charles walked to the land end of the dock. Ruth and me followed a few steps behind, little mice trailing behind dogs that were fixing to fight. The boy in the red hat set down the case and fiddled with the strange wooden thing. It was actually 2 strange wooden things, a folding desk and a small stool. After he set up both of them, the thin fellow laid the book on the desk, opened it to a blank page, and perched on the rickety stool. The boy opened the case and took out a bottle of ink and a quill, which he set next to the book. He closed and latched the case, then stepped back and put his hands behind his back, eyes ahead like he was a soldier too. "Good day, Charles." Bellingham inclined his head towards Madam. "Mrs. Lockton." Ruth started to raise her hand to wave at them, but I grabbed it and held it down. "Mr. Bellingham," Madam replied, "how fares your good wife?" "Happy that summer's nearly here. You know how she hates the cold." "Please tell Lorna I shall call on her as soon as we are settled," Madam said. "Very good," Bellingham said. "We thought you were in London, Elihu." "London never!" exclaimed Lockton. "England offers us nothing but taxes, stamps, and bloodshed." "How odd! Words from Boston is that you still lick the king's boots." Madam drew in a breath sharply, but said nothing. "Why do you insult me, sir?" Lockton replied. "We are at war, sir," Bellingham said in a voice that all could hear. Several of the dock workers put down their burdens and stood up straight. "Insults are the least of my concern. I'm worried about the British invasion." Lockton shrugged. "I am a merchant with cargo to sell. Search my crates. If you wish, search the entire ship. You won't find the British fleet, I promise you. Those yellow-bellied cowards have sailed to Canada." Bellingham took 2 steps and stood a fingertip away from Lockton. He lowered his voice. "I don't have time for your games. The Committee of Safety suspects you a Tory, in cahoots with Governor Tyrone. You've come to fight us, who strive for freedom and liberty." All the work on the ship stopped. The air had suddenly grown warm. I glanced sideways. The soldiers guarding the crates had picked up their guns. The clerk at the desk was the only one who seemed unrattled. He opened the ink bottle, dipped his pen, and scratched something across a blank page. I caught the boy behind the clerk sparing a quick look at Ruth and me. His eyes were dark gray, the color of sea during a storm. "Freedom and liberty have many meanings," Lockton finally said. "Am I free to return to my home? Shall I be at liberty from the improper meddling of your committee?" Bellingham held his position a moment longer. Then he took one long step back. "Search the cargo," he commanded. The soldiers, who laid down their weapons, picked up the crowbars. "Very well," Lockton said. "Am I under arrest?" "Not until I find something," said Bellingham. "Then I'm leaving." "My wife is exhausted and needs me to accompany her home. Charles will stay and supervise." The round man sputtered twice but didn't say a word. "Enjoy your homecoming," Bellingham said. "It may be short." The soldiers had started to go through the crates and call out the contents, the clerk writing down the details in his big book. Lockton motioned with his elbow again. "Come, dear," he said firmly. Madam refused to move. "We cannot leave without my chest." "Now, wife," he said, "it will be sent along." "It travels with me," Madam said crisply. "Mr. Bellingham." Bellingham bent over the clerk's inventory book and looked up. "Ma'am?" "Does your battle of liberty entitle you to search through the private linens of a lady?" The doc fell silent again. It was one thing for a gentleman to threaten another with arrest. The topic of a lady's linens was delicate. Bellingham cleared his throat and stood up straight. "Well, the rules—" "Do I gather, sir, from your hesitation that you are unsure of the etiquette involved? Perhaps you lack the proper authority." She carefully set herself on the walnut chest in question. "Oh, no, Anne, please," Lockton groaned. "Do not do this, my dear." Madam ignored him. I demand that Mr. Bellingham write to his Congress in Philadelphia. If they give him permission for common soldiers to rifle through my personal goods, then I will surrender. Until that letter arrives, I shan't move. I shall guard my dignity day and night. Charles shifted nervously from foot to foot. Lockton pinched the space where his nose met his forehead. The soldiers studied the tips of their boots. Bellingham muttered something impolite, and the boy standing behind the clerk fought hard not to smile. My own lips twitched. A woman defending her underclothes from a battalion of soldiers was comical. I didn't dare laugh, of course, but Ruth did. She giggled, a sound like a small silver bell, a bell tolling disaster. Madame Lockton flew off the chest and pointed her finger at us. Which one of you made that noise? Her face flushed with rage, her eyes darting back and forth between us. I did, ma'am, I quickly lied. The smile on Ruth's face faded as she figured that something bad was unfolding. Crack! Lightning struck from a blue sky. Madame slapped my face so hard it near threw me to the ground. The sound echoed off the stone-faced buildings. Ruth grabbed at my skirts and helped me stand straight again. She was confused, but kept her mouth closed, thank heavens. My cheek burned, but I fought back the hot tears and tried to swallow the lump in my throat. No one had ever slapped my face like that, not once in my whole life. Better me than Ruth. Better me than Ruth. Madame sat back on the wood chest and looked calmly at her husband as if nothing had happened. The soldiers all went about their business, one of them whistling. The only person who looked my way was the boy in the red hat. He kept his features frozen in a mask, but he swallowed hard. Lockton shrugged. You see, Bellingham, I don't have time for your war. I've enough battles in my own household. Bellingham sighed and waved at the soldier closest to where Madame sat. You there, carry the lady's belongings to her carriage. He did not mention me. I was already forgotten, dismissed, though the outline of her palm and fingers still burned on my skin. For an instant, I saw myself pushing her off the dock into the water below, but I blinked twice and the vision vanished. I took Ruth by the hand. Madame gracefully rose. Thank you, Mr. Bellingham. Lockton offered his arm again to his wife, and this time she took it. Bellingham lifted his hat as they passed. Ruth and me trailed close behind. As we approached the carriage, the driver jumped down and opened the door. Lockton helped his wife as she stepped up and settled on the padded seat. Well done, my dear, he murmured. Well done, indeed. Madame blushed. 'Twas all your doing. She smoothed her skirts. Put that little girl up with the driver. What about the older one? She leaned forward to stare at me, standing just behind her master. Send that one to fetch us some clean water. I doubt Becky has had word of our arrival yet. Lockton looked puzzled. How will she know where to find the pump? Or how to get home, for that matter? Charles will find someone to assist her. I'll take her, sir. Lockton turned around. The boy had removed his red hat and bowed politely. I'm Curzon, sir, Mr. Bellingham's boy. My master needs me to fetch new quills up Vandewater Street. I could show your girl the way. The driver and the soldiers had finished strapping the walnut chest to the back of the carriage. The driver spoke gently to Ruth and took her by the hand to meet the horses. She giggled and went eagerly. Lockton studied the boy, then looked over to Bellingham, who was inspecting one of the opened crates with the nervous Charles by his side. Excellent idea, said Madame. You know where our house is? Lockton asked Curzon. One of the proudest in our city, sir, the boy answered as he put his hat back on his head. With him standing this close, I could see the gold ring in his right ear, like a pirate's, and a long, thin scar that ran along the left side of his chin. South side of Wall Street, just past Smith. Lockton grunted and glared at him. Be quick about your business. No dawdling, understand? I curtsied, bewildered at the speed of it all. Yesterday, I had been aboard a ship. The day before that, sold in a tavern. The day before that, I woke up in my own bed and watched an old woman die. My belly ached again, as if I were still at sea and the waves were throwing me off balance. Well? Lockton demanded. Yes, sir, I whispered. He looked at his wife. This one might be simple, too. He climbed into the carriage, closed the door, and rapped at the ceiling with his knuckles. Go, driver. The carriage rolled away. Ruth sitting up straight with a big grin, the golden horses tossing their manes, hooves flashing in the sunshine. She waved to me as they drove away. I bent down, dipped my fingers in a puddle, and scrubbed the spot where the woman hit me. Chapter 6. Wednesday, May 29th, 1776. We are told that the subjection of Americans may tend to be the diminution of our own liberties. How is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of the Negroes? English author Samuel Johnson in his political pamphlet Taxation, No Tyranny. This way, the boy said as the carriage turned the corner. He headed away from the waterfront quick without looking back. I picked up my skirts and ran after him. Please slow down, I called. He pushed ahead. I tried to follow. We hurried past the biggest houses I had ever seen, past shops and taverns and manufactories, past city folk walking like their shoes were on fire, but I could not move fast enough and I was losing sight of him in the crowd. You best slow down, I called. Folks about me muttered and frowned. The boy stopped in front of a tavern and waited, his mouth twisted in irritation. I trotted up to him so angry that steam came off the top of my head. You offer me to help, then you abandon me. The words spilled out of my mouth. Where are we going? And why did she send me to buy water? Don't people here know about digging wells? He waited for a moment, then said, You ask a lot of questions. You give dull-witted answers, I shot back. Country girls are slow-moving, vexing creatures, he said. You're the vexatious one, I said, running off and leaving me like that. We stood glaring at each other, him with his arms crossed over his chest, me trying to catch my breath. Inside the tavern, a woman argued with a man about a leaking cask of beer. On the street corner, an army officer yelled orders at 4 soldiers building a barricade out of logs, large stones, and barrels full of dirt. My heart finally slowed, my brow cooled off, and I wanted to give myself a nasty pinch. Fool! I should have kept my temper. Now he would truly leave, and I would be lost in this horrible place, and there was no telling what Madame Lockton might do to Ruth in my absence. Apologies did not come natural to me, but I had no choice. I am sorry I spoke so rudely. He said. I'm sorry I caused you a fright, Country. Thank you, and my name is Isabel, not Country. Apologies again, Miss Country Isabel, he said with a smile. I should have explained before. We're headed up to what folks call the tea water pump. Rich people get their water from there 'cause it tastes the best. But first, I must deliver a message for my master. Stay here. He ducked inside a stationer's shop briefly and came out carrying a small parcel wrapped in a brown paper and 2 fresh rolls, steaming hot with butter oozing from one middle. Follow this away. We walked the length of an alley to a small courtyard. Someone had planted a garden there, and the first plants had come up. Peas, cabbage, and pennyroyal. Kurzon handed me a roll and pointed to a tree stump. Figured you'd want to sit and eat a bite. I have no money, I said. I can't take this. It cost me nothing, he said. The baker's daughter likes the lad who works the press. She brings him extra breads and pies. Go ahead, eat. Half of my roll disappeared in one bite. It was the first decent food I'd had since Jenny's kitchen. Kurzon watched me without saying a word. Then I licked the butter off my fingers. He gave me his roll. I ate a large breakfast, he said. My pride wanted to turn it down, but my belly was stronger. The second roll vanished as quick as the first. Thank you, I said when I finished. I'm beholden to you for that. Can we go now? I need to get back to my sister. He set his package on the tree stump. The littler one is your sister? That's why you took the blow meant for her, isn't it? A breeze ran through the courtyard, fluttering the leaves of a young pea plant and blowing cool across my cheek where Madame struck me. She needs watching over. He nodded. How long have you been with the Locktons? 3 days. Kurzon listened carefully as I told how Madame and her husband bought us. Lockton is a dirty loyalist, he said when I finished. Loyalist or rebel, I don't care. I stood up from the stump and brushed the back of my skirt clean. Can we go? He nodded, picked up his package, and led me out of the alley. You feel beholden to Lockton? Pardon? He's going to feed you and your sister, give you a place to sleep. He can order you sold, beat, or hung if the mood takes him. That can make a person feel a kind of loyalty. I stopped considering this. Someday I'll find that lawyer and Miss Mary's will, and that'll set us free. Until then, we need to eat, work, and stay together. So yes, I guess I'm loyal to Lockton. The words tasted bitter. Being loyal to the one who owned me gave me prickly thoughts, like burrs trapped in my shift, pressing into my skin with every step. We paused at the corner while a soldier drove a cart filled with barrels down the street. After we crossed, Kurzon spoke so quiet I had to lean in to catch his words. You might be better served if you placed your loyalty with us. Who is us? My master and those he serves. The rebels, the Congress. We're fighting for freedom from people like Lockton. I'm just fighting for me and Ruth. You can keep your rebellion. How much longer till this pump? He stopped inside a barricade. The brim of his hat cast his face in shadow. You might hear things at the Lockton house. What kind of things? Useful things. Things that might help you get to that lawyer and your freedom. I frowned. I don't like riddles, talk plain. New York is a ball tossed between the Loyalists and the Patriots, he said, scratching at the scar on his face. Right now, the Patriots hold it. So, Lockton has returned to hurt our cause. Why don't they arrest him? It's not that simple. Plenty of folks hereabouts haven't decided which side they favor. One day they cheer General Washington. The next day they toast the king. Putting Lockton in jail could turn them against us. He started walking again, nattering on and on about plots and conspiracies and battle plans and secrets, but truth be told, my mind drifted. I cared not a fig for politics nor soldiers. I was worried about my sister, and my cheek still hurt. Will you help us or not? He stared at me, intent, as I tried to figure his meaning. It slowly dawned. You want me to spy? I asked. Are you funny in the head? Do you know what they would do to me? Shh, he warned. Keep your voice down. You just have to listen and alert me if you hear anything important. You won't be in any danger. You are a crazy fool. How do you know I won't tell Master Lockton you sought me out? Wouldn't matter if you did. He knows he's under suspicion. Might do some good. Bring you favor in his eyes if you told him. But it would be a mistake. Lockton won't reward you. The Patriots can. Reward? Colonel Reagan is an officer in charge. He could send you back to Rhode Island, maybe help you find that lawyer and his papers. I pondered this. Was he lying? Can I trust this strange boy filled with war and secrets? What would Mama do? I shook my head. It's too dangerous. I'll have enough to do with chores and watching Ruth and keeping out of Madam's way. All you have to do is listen for talk of the king's troops. See, there you go again, proving you're a fool. They won't say anything in front of me. You are a small black girl, Country, he said bitterly. You are a slave, not a person. They'll say things in front of you they won't say in front of us, front of the white servants, because you don't count to them. It happens all the time to me. There was truth in his words, hard truth, a hammer striking stone. If you hear something, come to Bellingham's house in the night, across from where your ship docked this morning. I sleep in the shed room. Tap on the window and I'll awake. I touched my cheek. I couldn't. I shouldn't. I can't, I said. I promised Mama I would take care of Ruth. Now, can we go, please?